of things going completely escalated in the Middle East. Joining me for the conversation throughout the show, I'd like to say, is Conservative commentator Benedict Spence. Morning.
Good morning.
Who's very frustrated having to sit there while we interview James Matthewson, not getting a chance to have his tuppence worth. But I do want to hear his thoughts and your thoughts, in particular on Keir Starmer calling the Arson attack on 4 Jewish ambulances in London deeply shocking. He's called for people to stand together. We've seen Wes Streeting there. We've seen all the political heavyweights piling in. But what is your reaction to that? Because I didn't think it was shocking. That's my worry. I think it was entirely predictable in a timeline of events. I'm just relieved that no one died, as they did in the Heaton Park Manchester synagogue attack last year. But what's your reaction? Give us a call on 0344 499 1000. Text the word TALK and your message to 87222. Get in touch with us on X at Talk TV. Calls are charged at the national rate. Text cost £1. Standard network rate message. Benedict Spence, just first for your response to that attack. The reactions we've had, Wes Street and the Health Secretary's been there. He says he's going to make sure that the government is going to fund 4 new ambulances. I think everyone was basically getting ready to give donations for them to buy more. And they said it was a despicable act of evil and intended to strike fear into the heart of the Jewish community. But he said, but the Jewish community won't be cowed by this. In terms of the government response, I mean, everyone's saying all the right things, but frankly, it doesn't really wash anymore, does it?
No, it doesn't. Providing new ambulances, that's great, but I do think it's kind of the bare minimum. The reality is, though, that these sorts of things are going to keep on happening as a result of a lack of action when it comes to police intervention on this sort of thing, because we all know, actually, that there's not going to be anything like the mobilisation of resources that there should be towards stopping anti-Semitism. And ultimately, also, this is because there has just been a complete sea change in attitudes towards anti-Semitism, excuse me, in this country, largely driven as a result of migration and the war in Gaza. We've imported millions of people into this country who do not have anything like the attitude towards Jewish people that we would expect of fully integrated British citizens. And there is no sign that that is actually going to abate.
And the polling is very, very clear on
Very clear. And this actually is where I want to then turn into the conversation that you were having with James Matthewson, which is on the subject of people's democratic rights. He was sitting here saying that the people are here, they have the right to vote, and that has to be respected regardlars. But
can I just clarify the context of that? People who just tuned in, which is that one of the criticisms of Keir Starmer and his foreign policy is that partly it's just indecisive and hopeless, doesn't really know what he's doing. It's all about international law, but also that he's basically terrified of doing what he knows he should do because he's scared of losing the Muslim vote. We've got 4 million plus people, obviously not all of those are overaged able to vote, but 4 million plus people who are in this country, much bigger contingent than what the 250,000 or so, is it, Jewish people in this country. So and he's worried about losing that vote to the Greens, as he saw in the Gordon and Denton by-election, in the local elections that are coming up in May the 7th, and in future elections. And basically, we're talking about community voting on issues like Gaza, rather than issues that, that perhaps most British people would be worried about.
We shouldn't even say voting on Gaza. It's voting on Jews. That's what it is. They're voting on Jews. But here's the key thing. These attitudes are going to be protected because people will say, well, that's democracy. But we don't live in a democracy. And I'm sorry.
What do you mean we don't live in a democracy?
We don't. And here's the big one, because this is what gives these people the right to vote on all of these things. Consistently, the British population has voted for parties that have promised less immigration over and over and over, and they are not listened to. They're not given it. So please spare me they have the right to have these things and for things to be enacted because it's their democratic right. Politicians in this country do not believe in democracy or the rights of people to actually have enacted the things that they want. If they did, those people wouldn't be in this country in the first place. That's the great irony of all of this. So every time people talk about, oh, you couldn't possibly want to take away the democratic rights of people, this government and previous governments have done everything they can to erode
That's a very, very good point. And given the fact that actually the large number of British-born people are born their second generation to people who came in under mass immigration policies. We saw it from Europe, we saw it from the Indian subcontinent and elsewhere, which again not approved of by the British people. In fact, they actively said no, we don't want that, and not because they're bigots, but just simply because thank you, we're full. I think is rather the view. But it's interesting. Wes Streeting talking about this despicable act of evil. Wes Streeting going along and wringing his hands. And he's a Labour MP. I've had a lot of time for him. He is very, very friendly. Someone that, if I see him at an event, he and I would end up plenty of time chatting. And I think he's a nice bloke. But again, he lives in a constituency where he's got a majority of just a few hundred, and he almost lost it to sort of the pro-Gaza independence because of the issues of what's going on in Israel and Gaza. Last September, he attended the raising of the Palestinian flag at the Palestinian embassy when Britain, the British government, outrageously, completely wrongly, gave a full recognition of the Palestinian state as a reward, a clear reward. We know this because Hamas literally said that that's what it was, a reward for October the 7th. So don't you bloody well go to Golders Green and wring your hands and say, oh, isn't it terrible? What a despicable act of evil by anti-Semites against the Jewish community in London, when you joined in the clapping and the cheering. You got your face on the camera as they raised the flag of the Palestinian embassy after your government rewarded terrorists for raping, burning, beheading, shooting, killing and taking hostage 1,200 people from Israel. I mean, I'm sorry, you can't have it both ways.
No, you can't. And you reap what you sow, because this is the reality. All of these Labour MPs who have got those shrinking majorities are now going to, bend towards that sort of demographic and those sort of voters and say, well, we'll try what we can to possibly win you back over to our side. They're not going to vote for you anyway. They're not going to vote for Labour MPs anyway, because now they have their own candidates. Now they've seen they can win seats. The Green Party has stolen a march on them. And you raised the example of Hannah Spencer, winning in Gorton and Denton. And James said, well, people who want to oppress women are not possibly going to vote for that sort of person. They're not stupid, these people. They're not complete idiots. They understand how politics and power works. You go to those parts of the world, people don't necessarily vote on the issue of conscience. They vote for who is going to be the strong man in that constituency. They do it, they get into the party politics that way, and then they change things from the inside. This is a tried and tested format. We know how politics works in Pakistan, in Bangladesh.
And you know that world very well. You've done a lot of work.
It's really straightforward, and I'm sorry, it's such a classic British, sort of a perspective, which is we are multicultural, we're open and we're tolerant, and we don't care about learning the first thing about the people we invite into this country, because to learn anything, that would be either gauche or maybe even possibly a little bit racist to admit that there are differences. It's incredibly blind. This is the
really weird thing, is you just constant talk about different communities, so acknowledging the differences.
Exactly.
And then at the same time say, no, people are different. When the polling shows that the polling shows again that different communities have wildly different views on things. And on average, again, I do not believe that every Muslim in this country, I absolutely will stand up on this, every Muslim in this country is an Islamist. Absolutely not. However, a very large percentage, a very large minority, way too many people are sympathetic to the aims of the Islamists. And you're talking at best case scenario 10% of 4 million, worst case scenario 20 or 30%. Those numbers are huge, bearing in mind that 95% of those on the terror watch list are people who are Muslim, because they hold to an Islamist view. And by the way, that Islamist teaching is in the Quran. It's not just some random theology from elsewhere. It is part of that. And people really need to get with the programme on this, and we need to have an open conversation, which of course is even harder when people are calling for the likes of Nick Timothy, the Shadow Justice Secretary and Tory MP, to basically lose his job because he said, sorry, people are too polite to talk about this. I don't want to have mass Muslim prayer in Trafalgar Square. Now, I'm of the view as an atheist, I don't really want to have mass anyone prayer in Trafalgar Square. But I need to read out something, a fascinating breaking news statement from Donald Trump here, because we did have that deadline, 48-hour deadline given on Saturday by Donald Trump to Iran, basically, to the regime in Tehran. Basically, you've got to reopen the Strait of Hormuz by UK time midnight tonight, or they're going to, in his words, obliterate their energy plants. He says, and of course that would have a massive impact. Iran threatened back that they would also attack energy plants in Israel and across the Middle East. Donald Trump has just posted on his Truth Social site the following: I am pleased to report that the United States of America and the country of Iran have had, over the last 2 days, very good and productive conversations regarding a complete and total resolution of our hostilities in the Middle East. Based on the tenor and tone of these in-depth, detailed and constructive conversations, Donald Trump has continued, by the way, some terrible spelling in this, very difficult to read, which will continue throughout the week. I have instructed the Department of War to postpone any and all military strikes against Iranian power plants and energy infrastructure for a 5-day period, subject to the success of the ongoing meetings and discussions. Thank you for your attention to this matter, President Donald J. Trump. Now, you always know it's a policy issue when he says, thank you for your attention to this matter. Very interesting development because, of course, there had been negotiations about nuclear facilities before these attacks started by Israel and US. Well, we're in the 4th week now of these attacks. Lots of people fearing that we are looking at, this war escalating, I mean, quite literally blowing up into something much bigger, certainly involving, across the Middle East, as we've already seen those attacks by Iran on many of the other Arab states in the Middle East. But also that attempted attack on the Diego Garcia base in the middle of the Indian Ocean, showing that Iran does have ballistic missiles that could get as far as Western Europe, including London. The International Energy Agency warning that we're facing an oil crisis that's worse than the combination of what happened in the 1970s, those of us who remember that, and what happened in 2022 with the Ukraine war. Basically, that combined, that's encouraging. I mean, surely, if that is the case... That is very encouraging if they're actually having a conversation.
It is, but of course this is a large part of the issue, which is that, if Iran does start striking other countries, actually oil infrastructure and the Strait is closed, well, that also means Iranian oil can't get out, and then the regime itself
but they are allowed. No, they're allowing Iranian and Chinese oil.
Exactly, Chinese oil, and that's the problem.
Chinese bought oil.
But that's the problem, is that actually if that were to halt, if the Iranians started striking oil fields in Saudi Arabia, that sort of thing, then actually the United States would start sinking those ships. And actually the thing is, everybody's sort of looking at it going, well, they'd never sink, say, sort of Chinese flagged vessels. Yeah, they would. The amazing thing about all of this is China's attitude towards the US military. So many other people are looking at this from the outside. The Russians, for instance, are going, the United States, it ain't all it's cracked up to be. And the Iranians are going, come and have a go if you think you're hard enough. The Chinese are the ultra cautious ones here. There's a reason they haven't struck Taiwan yet. And why they want to build up to a position where they don't actually have to invade, where they simply smother the island into submission, because they are terrified about the prospect of a civilizational conflict with the United States. If it's a regional war with Iran, they're thinking, okay, it's a bit like Vietnam, a country can hold out. If it's an existential threat, China doesn't believe it could necessarily survive.
No,
it thinks the United States could die as well, but it doesn't want that.
Ultimately, the American military dwarfs even the Chinese military.
The Chinese military would be able to commit appalling devastation on the United States mainland, but China does not want civilizational collapse. It's not like Iran. It doesn't have a doomsday cult, and it's not actually interested in pushing global communism.
We're talking about Xi Jinping.
No, we're not even talking about that. He's not the dictator like Putin is. It's the kind.
He is now.
No, he's not. The Politburo still has a lot more control than say the equivalent in Russia. The point is, China is on a sort of it's lived through the century of humiliation. It wants wealth and prosperity, and it wants safety. It doesn't want to be attacked. And there's the interesting ideological issue of Taiwan. That's also a territorial one, but it actually wants to avoid the conflict. And that's why ultimately, even now, they're not pouring all the weapons into Iran that they could be doing. They didn't even pour all the stuff that they could have done into Russia in that war. They do like to sort of sit back, take their time, and think, what is the long-term strategy here?
But again, this is a lot of people were saying at the beginning of these strikes on Iran about how much this actually was about sort of depleting China's ability to fight by maintaining control of the Strait of Hormuz. And then there's all this concern that when the Iranians were able to close it, well, hold on a minute, didn't you lot all think of that? This is the worry. Again, I do not have Trump derangement syndrome. I'm very practical. Again, he was the best candidate versus Kamala Harris. I mean, thank God what he's done in Israel, getting those hostages back. I mean, sorry, but he'd been handed 5 Nobel Peace Prizes if he'd been any other president but Donald Trump. But I am concerned that he and Pete Hegseth, his Secretary for War, that they're not detailed people, and they're not necessarily taking the advice of their military and strategic advisors. That's the big concern. But this seems to be the off-ramp. Now, Donald Trump does have a history of right, I'm going to up the ante, want to play, because, and his thing has always been, I don't care about the Strait of Hormuz. I don't get, America doesn't get its oil. It does actually impact oil prices and fuel and inflation in America as well. But there is an element where and a lot of his advisors are sort of his willingness to say, I will do anything I want. I'm crazy. I'm unpredictable. That actually that is a strength sometimes, especially when you're dealing with properly crazy people like the Iranian mullahs.
Well, we saw this when he whacked Qasem Soleimani, and everybody was going, "Why on earth would you do that?" And it turned out to be the best thing that he possibly could have done. You took out the head of the snake in that situation.
In Iran.
The question, though, here is, if you're taking out ayatollahs left, right, and centre, and you're striking lots of members of the IRGC hierarchy, who ends up taking over? Because you might have the fanatics, and there are religious fanatics, of course, at the top, but there are also pragmatists. What I think has been the goal for a long time is get to a position where you can actually not affect regime change by the people rising up. That I don't think was ever plausible. But where there's actually a power struggle,
unpredictable about who ends up.
Actually where there was a power struggle within the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps itself over who takes charge, and maybe then you get the possibility of somebody who is more pragmatic, looks at the world and says, "Listen,
they might be an Islamist, but
I'm not going to get my Islamic revolution. It's not going to be great, but I do get the chance to lead the country, and that's better than being king of the ashes."
This is the fascinating thing. People on the left, and you certainly see it across the BBC and everywhere else, and then this constant criticism of Donald Trump. They haven't got any war aims. They've all been very, very confused. Sky News is out saying, they're always saying, "Oh, we don't know what the war aims are." He literally said what the war aims were when he first launched the strikes, when he was in Mar-a-Lago in that statement in the darkened room, and he was very, very clear, and it wasn't regime change. So when an American president says we're going to go for regime change, like somewhere like Iraq, no, that's outrageous. Who do you think you are? Or in Venezuela. And when he goes, no, I'm not interested in regime change. People of Iran, if you want to rise up, now is your opportunity. But I'm concerned about your ability to get nuclear weapons, posing a threat to America and to the wider world and to my allies in the Middle East, including Israel, and as it turns out, pretty much all the other Arab states as well, who most of whom are now run by people who care far more about money than they get, and wealth, and their gold Rolls Royces than they do about praying 5 times a day. That's the reality. But the thing is, they pick and choose. I think the war aims have been very, very clear all throughout. And it's nothing to do with regime change. In a that's not my problem. We tried that in Iraq and Afghanistan. Turns out it doesn't work. Now, Iran is actually a country that would possibly be possible in. It's a secular state, largely. I mean, this is the weird population, 70% secular. You could see a scenario, and very sophisticated, very well, highly educated. You could see a scenario where it would work. But, that's neither Israel's nor America's problem. Nuclear weapons, ballistic missiles that can reach Western Europe absolutely is.
Yeah, and from what we can see, actually, the plan to degrade Iran's capacity to launch these things is working. It is successful. The thing is, though, and again, we saw this with Ukraine, we've seen this with lots of other things as well, Gaza especially. A lot of people, armchair pundits, commentators, journalists, lawyers in the West, like to sit back and they see any sign of destruction coming the other way as a reason why it must stop. Everything is disastrous. It's like they've forgotten what wars are. It's like
completely. Well, the same with Gaza.
It's like, the Gaza
apparently
situation.
Some civilians died in Gaza. Really? Does that happen in wars?
Gaza is the best example. They seem to think that everything's like Call of Duty, that every soldier basically has a sniper rifle and will never hit a civilian, and every airstrike is clean. That's not how the world works. But of course, then when you have other examples like Darfur, well, they don't really care about that because it's not something that matters to you. Exactly. It's not.
No, but also, by the way, it is so unbelievably well documented now. Anyone who says they're a genocide scholar and says there was genocide, trust me, they're an idiot. Any genocide scholars, come on air. I'm happy to call you that on air. This is absolute nonsense. This is a simple matter of fact. And no, I don't get my 7,000 shekels for saying this. It's a simple fact that the civilian to combatant ratio of deaths is virtually 1.1 to 1. Now it's
a remarkable tally.
It's 9 to 1 in most. When we fight a war, when America fights a war, it's usually 9 civilians die for every combatant. It is as simple as that. Israel massively put its hand, basically tied 2 hands behind its back to not kill civilians. They gave warnings. You see these footage, the destruction. Gaza completely flattened. Well, actually, it's Rafah you're mostly looking at pictures of. The reason why Rafah was flattened was because Hamas basically put an IED into pretty much every room of every building in Rafah. They knew exactly what they were doing, and therefore there was no choice but to take those buildings out. But by the way, if every single building was flattened with civilians in it, you would have lost half the population of Gaza, and we didn't see that. If Israel wanted to carry out a genocide, have they not shown that they are unbelievably good on the battlefield? Unbelievably strategic. What they did with the Hezbollah pages to Iranian, the way they've got the whole of Mossad's basic work. Most Iranian regime was a Mossad agent. The idea that if Israel wanted to carry out a genocide, they wouldn't have done it on day one. It's a it's just a nonsense.
Yeah, the disgraceful thing actually about all of the people who cry about this the most is, I wouldn't even say Darfur and South Sudan. No. Actually, it's Syria, which is literally right there.
Yeah.
And the appalling atrocities that have been done against predominantly civilians, where militias were going after civilians specifically. Yeah. And, forget Iraq and Afghanistan, which were also the ones where you had sort of 8-to-1 and 9-to-1 sort of civilian ratios. Syria has been an appalling humanitarian catastrophe.
Targeting any militants.
These same people who go out to protest against Gaza, that's fine, but you then have to answer, so what about that one that's not even halfway across the world? It's
and
literally
they certainly
right
don't
there.
seem to be remotely concerned about what's going on in Iran in terms of the attack ongoing. But by the way, teenagers are still being executed. They're being hanged in public for having been involved in these peaceful protests against this regime. Not a word from this lot. Do you think this attack on those 4 ambulances, the Jewish ambulance service in Golders Green, do you think that is... people say it's an anti-Semitic attack. Why would it have been the causes? Again,
is it an anti-ambulance attack? Do people hate the NHS?
Yeah.
Well, they might do, but obviously,
okay,
that's what this is.
So, in terms of the motivation, we've got 3 suspects on CCTV that be doing track down, and hopefully will be caught and charged and prosecuted. But do you think that's as a result of what's happening in the Middle East right now?
I think that what happened in the Middle East sparked the bravery of a lot of anti-Semites to feel that they could go out and say this sort of thing en masse, because they realised very quickly, actually, if we do it in large enough numbers, the police won't actually.
And we say we're anti-Israel. Yeah. Then it's so.
That's what gave them. It's what emboldened them to do it. But these attitudes did not, spring up one day. No. It's because we have invited millions of people into this country who have incredibly backwards views on Jewish people, not Israel, on Jewish people. Yeah. The key giveaway here is the number of people you see on these marches from Pakistan and Bangladesh, 2 countries that have nothing to do with that part of the world. Yeah. And these are people who never go to that part of the world, and they have very strong attitudes about Jewish people. And you think, right, so why would Pakistani and Bangladeshi people... It's because of what they're being taught, indoctrinated from early on in life. You don't even get the same amount of visceral from Arab nations in the region. You don't get it from the Emiratis or the Saudis or the Kuwaitis.
By the way, none of these marches and things, none of this stuff's allowed in any of those countries.
No, and this, just to finally take it back to that last point, what we were talking about, why it is that there are that many people here, it's because in those parts of the world, Morocco, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, they arrest these people and often they leave. Do you remember Alaa Abdel Fattah, the Egyptian man, member of the Muslim Brotherhood? He's here now.
Imprisoned in Egypt and
those people are imprisoned in those countries.
Our
and
Prime Minister.
They come here because they know they will have a degree of safety that they do not have in that part of the world.
Because we tolerate intolerance. Yeah. Just a reminder that Donald Trump, Truth Social post, basically saying there's been conversations between the US and Iran in the last 2 days after that ultimatum given to Iran. And he says he's instructed his Department of War to postpone any military strike against power plants, energy infrastructure for 5 days while they carry on with those conversations. So hopefully a winding down of the war. He says the US is close to the objective of winding down the war. Fingers crossed on that, assuming we've achieved those war aims. 11:26 is the time. Love to hear your thoughts on that, your thoughts and your reactions to that horrific attack on the ambulances in Golders Green. Thank God no one got injured in that arson attack. That's the only thing we can say is good news this morning on that front. But give us a call. 0344 499 1000 is the number to get in touch. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good morning, welcome back to the show. 11:28 is the time. Let's get straight to your calls. 0344 499 1000. Some of your messages and texts and tweets as well. First up, let's go to Adit, who is in Golders Green. Hello, Adit. What do you want to say?
Thanks for having me, Julia. I think the residents are nervous. They're shaking. And the goal of the terrorists have been met. You know, they wanted to intimidate us. We are scared. My wife this morning is asking, you know, should we send our child to school or not? I mean, that's the kind of scenario that we're all facing. And it's a byproduct of, you know, what the polity of the day, both mainstream parties in the UK have shown, you know, they've given disproportionate amount of patronage to Muslim politics in the UK. And this is the byproduct of that. You know, when you stand there and you patronize, you know, Free Palestine rallies and you patronize Muslim politics in the UK, this was always going to be happening. So the writing was there for us in the war. We just missed it. And now, as a consequence, you know, you will have the Keir Starmers and the various politicians and coming saying that, you know, we are very sorry about this, and yet they will go on and, you know, provide 40 million pounds of, you know, security to mosques, whereas other communities will continue to suffer the wrath of Muslim politics.
Oh, well, I mean, look, I mean, we know that the British taxpayer also, and the government also funds the community trust, you know, that does the work for the Jewish community. I mean, I don't want a tax on any, you know, on any religion, whether it's Muslim or Jewish, religious or charity, any or buildings or any. I don't want to tax on anyone, but it does seem to me that we've imported a lot of this problem. But we often have people will say, well, you know, if Israel wasn't doing what Israel was doing in the Middle East, we often seem to see that justification, don't we?
Julia, my point is, as an Indian man, as a man from India who's migrated into Britain, has paid his taxes, I do not want to see foreign politics interfering on British streets. And that is what we've seen time and time again, whether it be the politics from the subcontinent, whether it be politics from the Middle East. We've got to stop advocating for politics of abroad being patronized on British streets. And that's what British society needs to stand up for. I think we've just lost our spine. We've forgotten how to demonstrate our spine and stand up to these kind of barbarity being shown on the streets of London.
Given where we are, starting from this point, not where we would like to be starting from, what should politicians do now? What should the police do now?
Well, for starters, I think we need to start proscribing international organizations like the IRGC as terror outfits. I mean, it's clear that, you know, Ashab al-Yamin, who allegedly have taken responsibility for this attack, and they've done this previously in Belgium and Netherlands. You know, this is an Iran-linked group where we're told, but we don't. Again, this is reports on Telegram and Julia, the same with Muslim Brotherhood. Why is the Muslim Brotherhood proscribed in the Middle East as a terror outfit, but not in Britain?
I don't think that describing either of those groups will actually make a blind bit of difference to what's happening on our streets right now.
And then we've got to stop calling out. We've got to understand that Britain needs British politics, not the politics of Palestine or Kashmir or anywhere else.
Okay, really appreciate that call, Eddie. Thank you very much. Calling in from Golders Green, of course, which is where that arson attack on the 4 ambulances of the Jewish charity were attacked. Let's go to Thomas now. He's in Colwyn Bay. Hello, Thomas.
Hello, how you doing?
Very well. What do you want to say?
I think it's really interesting to see the difference in the reaction and the coverage to the perception of ambulances being attacked by Israel in Gaza and in Iran to this attack in Golders Green. Not 4 days ago did the IFRC put something out about ambulances not being a target. Nothing from the British Red Cross, nothing from the ICRC, the International Committee of the Red Cross, Amnesty International.
Wait a second, you're saying the international charities, they make it really clear that ambulance shouldn't be a target in Gaza or Iran or elsewhere. Healthcare should absolutely not be a target. But you're saying they haven't. I mean, I'm guessing they didn't expect this to happen. In their defence,
Amnesty International has put a post out saying that it's appalling, this attack. Where's everybody else's response?
Okay,
why is it important in Gaza and Iran, but not here?
Yeah, basically the two-tier response and the holding of different standards. Thomas, thank you for that. Let's go to some of your texts and tweets. Also, Marcus said, if this happened in Israel, it would be considered a terrorist attack. Stop playing around with silly words and call it what it is, terrorism. Stephen says, simply remember Kristallnacht. I mean, yeah, absolutely, this is what it's about. Kat says, it's truly despicable, the Arson attack. This follows years of media distortion and lies led by the BBC and over 2 years of marches calling for the destruction of Israel. All of those lies have demonised Israel and normalised hostility towards Jews. Kat, you've explained that rather better than pretty much any politician. And that is what happens. I mean, these things have nothing to do with each other, but they do, you know. John says, has the Prime Minister blamed the far right for this yet? Only yeah. God, but they've got their fingers crossed, haven't they? They're really hoping it will be. Eileen says, I wish Starmer would learn that appeasement never works. Flo says, blah, blah, blah. He's allowed the virus of anti-Semitism to spread. It's after Keir Starmer called the attack deeply shocking. And Deborah says he must realise that allowing the hate marches has fuelled anti-Semitism in the UK. I mean, yeah, I mean, I just don't think that that's even up for debate anymore. I really, really don't. We just allowed it to just fester and carry on. And it is something we've largely imported. When you look at the rise in attacks, anti-Semitic attacks in this country, trying to get the stats for who are the perpetrators behind them, yeah, quite hard to do. But I'm pretty sure I won't be incorrect in saying who those perpetrators largely are. 11:35 is the time. We're going to take a quick break and then we're going to be talking about the Home Secretary and her bid to deport thousands of migrants before they can appeal. Well, very good luck with that, Shabana Mahmood, but I'm not entirely sure the rest of the Labour Party is on board. That's up next. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense. 11:36 is the time. Let's speak to my next guest now. He's Laurie Wastel. He's Associate Editor at the Daily Sceptic and joins us to talk about, well, the latest cunning plan to deal with illegal immigration to this country by the Home Secretary, Shabana Mahmood. Another Monday, another plan, eh, Laurie?
Well, quite, Julia. It is, yes, a cunning plan, an interesting plan, I think it's fair to say. So what's going on here is the Home Secretary has realised, as many people have, that the asylum system is really a merry-go-round in many ways, with all these appeals that migrants can lodge endlessly to keep them in the country. And so what she's saying is that she will be deporting migrants before them having had their appeals heard to countries that are deemed to be safe. This is a fairly large list of countries that it's not all of the ones we might want to be on there, and therefore those appeals will be heard in foreign countries. So it's not nothing. But there's, well,
so they still get the chance to appeal, but they're going to have to appeal from across from the overseas. But hold on a minute. Weren't the Tories talking about this at some point when they were in power? And didn't Labour go, this is an outrage?
Yes, indeed, and it's interesting that Shabana Mahmood is seeming to be more forthright than a large amount of her party, certainly. But I think that is the key point. the ECHR will still be applying to this. Okay, so it would be very, very possible for any of these migrants to actually win these appeals. Eventually, they'll be supported by charities when they're making them in foreign countries, for instance, and activist lawyers and so on. So this raises the almost extraordinary prospect of migrants in a country like Nigeria, for instance, to which they have been deported, then launching a successful appeal for asylum and then being flown back.
Brilliant.
So it again seems like a bit of a half measure.
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose the idea would be, well, it dissuades people, but I'm not sure it would in that scenario. But also, crucially, it would mean that we weren't paying for them while they were here. But the reality is, with all this madness in terms of the completely incorrect interpretations about people's rights and European Convention of Human Rights, and would it not be the case that actually we wouldn't be able to deport these people? There would still be charities and human rights lawyers who would challenge that.
Well, I think the idea certainly is to get around that. It is likely that that some of the sort of pre-appeal deportations would also have challenges to them. But I think that the key problem is that they could, as I say, be flown back. I think we should give her some credit. I mean, the raw problem of asylum seekers in this country is simply the fact that they are here. This is the cost of asylum hotels. This is the potential putting the British public in danger. And this is also the incentive for them to come. And let's remember, there is another loophole that this does close off, which is the ability for migrants to abscond.
Yeah.
So that would be, that's another reason that we don't really want to have them in the country when these claims are being processed. Yeah. But that said, the question is numbers. Will she be able to get this through the courts and potentially her own party?
But surely, given that we don't have the caps to hold of the people, we don't have some sort of prison camp even for the people who arrive, on any given sunny weekend, for goodness sake, even in the the winter months these days. These people are going to be free to move around. As soon as you're going to be deported to Nigeria or Somalia or wherever, you're just going to disappear off into the black market, as they already are. They're only staying where we know where they are because they're being housed and fed for free. Why would you bother hanging around otherwise? So none of this is going to work. We've also got the added joy, have we not, that we're expecting now a surge. I mean, I don't know how we can get an even bigger surge. I mean, how many can come across in a day? But another surge in migrant crossings in coming weeks, because this deal that we've got that funds the French beach patrols is running out within days. We spent £475 million over 3 years, and it comes to the end at the end of this week. At the end of next week, it comes to the end of that payment. It's not been very successful. We're told, the French are stopping half the boats maybe on a good day when they happen to not be at lunch, smoking their gitanes, looking at people on the beach. But I mean, is it going to get worse, even worse than it's been already, given that we've seen a surge under Keir Starmer already?
I think absolutely. I mean, one key factor in that under Starmer has actually been the scrapping of the Rwanda plan. We know that it's really the prospect of getting into the country and not getting deported that allows people in. It's those pull factors, and that Rwanda plan, whether or not the flights did end up taking off, it did actually seem to be quite a strong measure to prospective migrants, and therefore does seem to have been a bit of a deterrent. So that was a very unwise choice. But of course, the key point here is that we're here in March. We've had a very rainy period in the first 3 months of the year, but now we're heading into spring, into summer, and so that is really one of the key determinants of the migrant crossings, and they're going to be looking likely to have a massive amount of crossings over that period. And for the issue of migration in as a political issue as well, it's really going to turn up the temperature, I would say.
Yeah, and we've seen those battles between the Labour Party, so big wigs already, haven't we? Because we've had, over the last few days, we've had Angela Rayner. She gave that speech that she gave on, I think on Wednesday, where she was basically talking about how she was very much opposed to Shabana Mahmood, the Home Secretary's sort of attempts to clamp down on the rights of people once they're here legally, to then be able to claim basically permanent residency and having to wait, instead of just 5 years to make that application, having to wait 10 years, something which most people consider to be a minor and very welcome reform. We've had Andy Burnham back, Angela Rayner. This has definitely become an issue there. And again, this does also tie in, does it not? Because a huge number of the people who are coming from abroad, the largest number are coming from Pakistan, from Nigeria as well. We are talking about largely Muslim countries, and it is absolutely fascinating how much all these stories tie in. We talk about the anti-Semitic attack on the ambulances in in Golders Green. We've got the issues with Iran and Iranian extremism on our streets and the threat there, and of course this issue over Britain's foreign policy and local policies being basically decided by a fear of losing, quote, the Muslim vote, unquote. What do you make of all of that?
Oh, it's interesting you mentioned Pakistan there, Julia, because that has often been a blind spot in these restrictions that Shabana Mahmood is bringing in. So if we think back to her recent restrictions on countries getting student visas, because so many of their students were then going on to claim asylum, she targeted that at countries including Afghanistan, Myanmar, and a couple of African countries as well. Where there was a high rate of this abuse, but the country with the highest rate or certainly the highest absolute number claiming of students going on to claim asylum is Pakistan, and that was not flagged for that list. And once again, in this case of countries to which migrants could be deported before having heard their appeal, Pakistan is not on that list, it seems. And again, that's a country where we have seen a lot of asylum seekers, and there's actually no war going on in Pakistan, so it's
not quite sure
why we're so many.
Yeah, absolutely bizarre. What did you make also? A Labour council has, and this is quite an extraordinary story. A Labour council has basically criticised people for saying, basically you cannot say that migrants have no respect for women. This idea that that many people coming from, let's face it, from Muslim countries are coming from countries where they do not share many of the modern British Western liberal views on the equality of the sexes and the like. And this is Liverpool City Council. They've issued an online mythbuster addressing asylum and immigration, saying blaming foreign cultures for violence against women and girls reinforces harmful stereotypes. There is no causal link between asylum seeker populations and the increased level of violence against women and girls, and it's wrong to claim that migrants come from cultures that don't respect women. What do you say about that?
Well, it's absolutely extraordinary, isn't it? I mean, we're hearing from these Labour councils that we're not supposed to draw any link between the countries that these places, these gentlemen are from, and the crimes that they have gone on to commit. At the same time, we often hear in the courts, don't we, Julia, that actually, they'll go slightly more leniently on this particular sex offender because they were from a country where they didn't actually know you weren't supposed to.
And we've literally had judges saying this. You didn't really, the defence given in court and accepted by the judge is that, you didn't realise you're not supposed to, sexually grab 14-year-olds in your culture.
Yeah. So which one is it? And yes, it's very clear that these are countries with different cultural values, and this is why so many of these attacks are happening. I think there's the issue with illegal migration and asylum seeker crimes, which have been happening in particular in the last 2 or 3 years. But of course, there is also the grooming gangs, and this is a much more widespread systematic abuse. But central to that is the view of these white girls as really other, and as as it's been described, easy meat, essentially. And
I believe that phrase was used in court at some point, wasn't it, by a defendant, I believe?
Well, it's the title of a book, certainly, and I think probably that's certainly the perspective that many of them have towards them, describing them in
I don't know. Given we've got this new definition of anti-Muslim hostility, I don't know if we're even allowed to have this conversation legally anymore, Laurie.
Indeed. Well, yes, and that is another unfortunate consequence of multiculturalism, really, that we have this amount of demographic change, amount of cultural change, and yet we're often told we're not really allowed to talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Laurie Wastall, Associate Editor of the Daily Sceptic, thank you so much. Covered a lot of ground there. Benedict Spence, come back in whichever aspect of that conversation you want to.
I mean, in particular, the thing that sort of really gets to me is this idea about respect for women and stuff like that, because ultimately it's not just one thing. We see the lack of respect for so many aspects of our society that comes from certain migrant communities, and the issue that many people have is not that people are coming in, it's that refusal to assimilate in the first place. And I'm afraid that does require several things. We've been talking a lot about Jewish people throughout this show, but it's women as well. But it's even basic little things, like, did you hear the story about the plans to restrict dog walking and stuff in certain parts of London because it offends certain members of the community? It's insane.
No, but even, I mean, look, I refuse to not eat bacon because I'm someone in the restaurant or something. Or
in schools, they don't serve pork products in some cases, in case it offends people. You're not allowed water bottles during Ramadan.
I'll eat bacon in front of a vegan as well. I don't care. I think it's just that's not tolerance. That's tolerance of intolerance.
Yeah, it's insane. And other countries
do
not
this.
go. Yeah, no, to no extreme extent. And if you go to parts of the Middle East and stuff like that, go to Istanbul during Ramadan. Do they stop serving food at lunchtime? No, they don't. They absolutely go. Exactly. No, of course we're open for business because you're not Muslim, so we expect that. Yeah. Why is it just this country that takes this attitude?
Exactly. When in Rome, but when in Britain, do what you want. 11:48 is the time. I'm going to take a quick break. First up, though, the Detective Chief Superintendent of the Met Police, Luke Williams. He's been giving a statement on site in Golders Green where that arson attack took place. He says that it has been declared an anti-Semitic hate crime. It's not been declared a terrorist incident, he says, at this stage. But the investigation is being led by counter-terrorism officers. Up next, going to be talking about, how the events in the Iran war are affecting our economic future. By the way, all of the outlook is bad. That's up next with Paul Johnson, formerly of the Institute for Fiscal Affairs. That's up next. This is Talk.
Is facing its gravest test in decades, and the royal tea from Talk is your front row seat. With royal reputations under pressure and probing questions about public trust, we unpack every twist and revelation with the biggest names in the business. From the throne room at Buckingham Palace to a mansion in Montecito, we follow every royal ripple. Never miss a moment of The Crown in crisis. Subscribe to the royal tea from Talk on the app or wherever you get your podcasts.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good morning, welcome back to the show. 11:51 is the time. Just a few minutes left before the top of the hour to talk about the small matter of our economic future. And in the wake of the announcement from Donald Trump on his Truth Social site that he has entered talks with Iran over basically a complete and total resolution of our hostilities in the Middle East, saying that he has instructed the Department of War to postpone those planned military strikes against Iranian power plants and energy infrastructure for a 5-day period. That was planned if they did not reopen the Strait of Hormuz by midnight tonight UK time. We have seen oil prices, which had been feared to be going up to sort of like $200 a barrel, so pretty much more than doubling in price over the period of the war, now plummeting down again. So hopefully good news. Well, let's find out how much with Paul Johnson. He's the former director of the Institute for Fiscal Studies. Morning to you, Paul.
Good morning.
Thank you for joining us. Well, look, I mean, that Truth Social post from Donald Trump, if it is the case that there are talks and we could see an end to the hostilities, at the very least, not a tax on, oil infrastructure, that's good news for everyone, pretty much, isn't it?
Well, let's hope so. I mean, we've been saying throughout this conflict that the economic consequences will depend essentially entirely on how long this goes on. So if this is really an indication that hostilities are going to come to an end, well, the consequences won't be nil, and we will still suffer some continuing increase in energy costs, but they won't be anywhere near as bad as they would have been had this if this were to continue on for months and months. So yeah, who knows quite what Donald Trump's going to do next?
That's the thing. The unpredictability.
This is a glimmer.
The unpredictability is part of the problem, is it not? I mean, that's the concern. I mean, we've got lots of fears of where the economy is going. We've got the Prime Minister's chairing this Cobra meeting this afternoon. The Bank of England governor is going to be one of those people attending it, along with the Chancellor and the Foreign Secretary, and really helpfully Ed Miliband, the taking us all back to the dark ages, one wind turbine at a time secretary. Not entirely sure his input is going to be that helpful, but we do know that there are problems coming. We're seeing prices creeping up at the forecourts. We're told because we need fossil fuels for things like fertilizer. We're looking at costs of our food going up, our energy bills going up by perhaps another £300 this year after the next price cap ends. And this comes, of course, just ahead of April, where of course we've got all those other little taxes, council tax going up, the tax thresholds frozen. Things are going to start getting very tight for an awful lot of British people, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, this will. I mean, there is a little bit of positive news in April in that some of the green levies are being taken off energy bills. So we'll have a short period of a little bit of help there, but then come the next change in July, then things will go up several £100s, which will more than outweigh those impacts. You're also right, of course, about the freezing of the tax allowances. I think that's the 5th year in a row now when tax allowances have been frozen. That is a mighty big increase in taxes. And actually, if you look over this Parliament, indeed you look over this decade, people's earnings aren't going up very fast, but their incomes are going up much less fast because taxes as a whole are going up. And that, of course, reflects all of these years of huge deficits and big increases in spending, because this is also big spending increases over this period. But as you go back to that Cobra meeting, yes, I mean, they're going to be talking about the fact that, I mean, a month ago, people thought the Bank of England was going to have a couple more interest rate cuts this year. They're now talking about 3 interest rate increases. That's clearly going to be a big issue for anyone with a mortgage. It's also a big issue for the economy, because you might need to do that to keep inflation down, but with an economy that's stalling, you increase some interest rates, you put more of a stalling effect on the economy. That's more pressure on the government actually to spend more, but the government's really not got much room.
And they can't borrow anymore because the cost. I mean, are we at the risk of stagflation? It's this idea that we could actually have stagnation, we could go into recession, but also still have a high inflation?
Well, I mean, let's hope not. Let's hope that Donald Trump is going to do what he says he's going to do. But the answer to your question is yes, there is a risk. There's exactly a risk of that, because that's exactly what would happen if we get the higher inflation as a result of what's going on in the Middle East. The economy slows down. The Bank of England increases interest rates, slows it down further, and the government's constrained about what else it can do. There is a real, again, let's hope this stops soon, but there is a real possibility. If energy prices get higher, and they're getting significantly higher, we get worse off. I mean, there's just no getting around that, and that will manifest itself in some combination of higher prices and lower real earnings in that sense, or lower employment and lower living standards in that sense. I mean, we can't. In the end, you just can't escape that. I mean, this is just making us worse off.
I mean, and that's the way we've had a warning from the International Energy Agency, basically saying that oil crisis, certainly before this statement from Donald Trump this morning on Truth Social, is worse than what we saw in the 1970s. I think you and I are both old enough to remember that, but also the 2022 Ukraine war, and obviously we saw that impact, of course, not just on oil prices, but also, supply of fertilizer, food and everything. We saw that we got to 11.1% inflation in this country. But basically they're saying it could be this combined. If we look at things backing off and we're not looking at things escalating as we were fearing, certainly even just a couple of hours ago, that will be good news. But even if, let's say, the Iran war was over today, if that happened, Strait of Hormuz was reopened, energy production continued, would that be the end of the problems, or is a lot of that already built in terms of those higher petrol and diesel prices, higher heating costs, higher food costs?
some of it's built in. I mean, this is not going to have no effect, not least because a lot of the infrastructure has been destroyed. But you'll get some supply constraints. So this won't be anything like as big an effect as if it carried on. But there's no getting around the fact that I think oil and gas prices, particularly oil prices, will stay higher than they otherwise would have done, and that will have its knock-on effects on everything else.
Okay. Oh, well, on that happy note, Paul Johnson, happy Monday, everybody. Sorry, I just missed that. What did you say?
You never want to talk to me if you want to get cheerful.
Paul Johnson, Mr. Happy, former director of the Institute of Fiscal Studies. Thank you. I know we want the honest analysis, do we not? And we've also had, have we not, Benedict Spence? We had petrol station bosses. They've hit out at Lord Walker, Richard Walker of the Iceland, not the country, the shops. They've hit out. He's the actual cost of living czar for Labour. He claimed drivers were being ripped off at the pumps. They're saying no, that's actually not true. Prices are going up for us. I mean, and that is the reality. You can't shield people from this.
No,
stuff.
you can't. And it was very classic Labour politicking, saying, "Oh, there's price gouging going on." It's like, no, the market reacts because prices go up. It's nothing to do with greedy bosses or anything like that. But of course, that's Labour's default response, isn't it? It's the evil rich.
But even the big oil companies, it's just like, well, hold on a minute, the price has gone up, and most of the price we pay, by the way, is tax. Or it's either VAT, it's fuel duty, it's other surcharges. So if the government wants those prices to come down,
maybe they should stop price gouging. All of us. Maybe they should stop doing that.
Price gouge, that's for sure. Anyway, plenty more coming up. Delighted to say up next we're going to be talking to Richard Dannatt, Lord Dannatt now. He's the former head of the British Army, about that attack on Diego Garcia, where we are with what Donald Trump has said in talks with Iran and what happens next. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
A very, very good afternoon. Welcome back to the show. This is Talk. We are the home of common sense, and I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. Whether you're listening on DAB Plus Radio or on your smart speaker, watching on YouTube, or your connected device, thank you so much for your company. If you missed anything of the show already, well, frankly, you're crazy. We're on the way till 1 o'clock, but don't forget to go to my YouTube page, the Julia Hartley-Brewer Show. Hit subscribe, and you never have to miss a thing. Coming up in this hour, we are going to be discussing Donald Trump, his extraordinary post on Truth Social saying that Iran and and America are in talks right now regarding a complete and total resolution of our hostilities in the Middle East. He has instructed the Department of War, he says, to postpone any and all military strikes against Iranian power plants and energy infrastructure for a 5-day period. Subject to success of the ongoing meetings and discussions. So that deadline would have been midnight, pretty much UK time tonight, for reopening the Strait of Hormuz, or attacks from the US on energy infrastructure in Iran, which would have been met with retaliation from Iran to not just Israel, but also other Arab states in the Middle East in terms of their energy plants as well. That deadline is no longer in place. So that will be a sigh of relief for everybody. We've seen the oil price already plummeting down in the hopes that we can see the end of this war. We're also going to be talking about Keir Starmer being accused of basically lying to the public, keeping them in the dark over Iran's failed missile strike on the Diego Garcia military base in the middle of the Indian Ocean. We're also going to be discussing more, of course, the anti-Semitic attack on the Jewish ambulance services, 4 burnt-out ambulances outside a London synagogue. It has been declared as an anti-Semitic hate crime. Counter-terrorism unit is leading the investigation, but it has not, according to the Metropolitan Police, been announced as designated as a terrorist attack, certainly as yet. We're also going to be talking more about scrapping most short-term jail terms. That's coming into effect in England and Wales as of today. So if you're going to be sentenced to under a year behind bars, you just get a community sentence. It's basically a free-for-all. Oh, yeah, and we're going to be talking about Macmillan Cancer Charity, who just said they're going to prioritise welfare support for vulnerable communities like ethnic minorities and LGBTQ plus people for their cancer care. Well, I'm going to prioritise not giving my money to a charity that discriminates against me and my loved ones. We'll talk about all of that. Joining me for the conversation, Conservative commentator Benedict Spence, still here. A very good morning to you.
Good morning.
Before we speak to Lord Dannatt, just got to get your quick thoughts, if I can, on this Donald Trump announcement of basically Department of War is going to postpone any and all military strikes against Iranian power plants and energy infrastructure. Are you hopeful that we will see an end to this war?
I don't think it'll be an end to the war. I think it will simply be a pause whilst the United States maybe recalibrates. I'm very hesitant, but it's good news up to a point. The markets seem to be responding vaguely positively. Oil prices are coming down, bonds are coming down. So we wait and see. Let's hope.
Well, let's see what my next guest thinks. He is the former head of the British Army, Lord Dannatt, who joins us live here on Talk. A very good afternoon to you, sir.
Afternoon, Juliet.
Thank you for joining us. Well, I mean, how optimistic are you after that announcement from Donald Trump?
Well, every day, every hour brings fresh surprises. And I think at breakfast time, we wouldn't have considered where we are now to be likely. But I think this is classic Donald Trump. I mean, he put this 48-hour deadline down, which is due to expire about midnight our time tonight. And one began to wonder, gosh, would he really carry that threat through? Yeah. Would he really carry out the threat to destroy Iran's capability? That would be a massive escalation. So what he's done, I think, is very cleverly, at least temporarily, called success, calling for a 5-day, effectively a ceasefire. And he says that they've been very productive conversations with Iran. But, you know, you do wonder who in Iran he's been talking to. He's boasted about having killed most of the leadership in the past. Yeah. And one wonders whether, in fact, actually these talks are fabricated by himself to get himself off the hook.
Oh, really?
Of an ultimatum that he knew that he couldn't really follow through.
I mean, but that's the thing. We've seen an ultimatum before, haven't we? You know, Obama and his red line in the sand in Syria in terms of chemical weapons being used, and that red line was walked over and nothing happened. And it's very important when a world leader, particularly, you know, the American president, issues a red line or an ultimatum that they are willing to carry through in it. But I mean, this is the question. I mean, you say, like, is it a ceasefire? But it seems to only specifically be talking about any and all military strikes against Iranian power plants and energy infrastructure. So it looks like the war is going to carry on. The strikes on military targets will carry on. Just not specifically, though, I've seen some reports suggesting that if there were attacks on energy infrastructure by the US, that would be a war crime. Is that the case, given that, of course, OK, this stuff is used, obviously, for civilians, and he said previously he wouldn't attack this infrastructure because, you know, the Iranian people would be needing those after the mullahs were deposed. It was the hope. But But if the Iranians are using that energy infrastructure to wage war, is it a legitimate target?
Well, you ask a very good question, and you've partially answered it yourself there, Julia. I think international lawyers would have a field day arguing whether attacking desalination plants, for example, constitute a war crime or not. But equally, you could argue that water is required to manufacture weapons and ballistic missiles and so on and so forth. So I think the international law fraternity would have a field day discussing this particular issue. But I think coming back to the main point, we don't know. We only have his word, which we have to take at face value, that they've had productive talks between Iran and America. For all I know, Turkey or Oman may well have been the interlocutors that have facilitated some form of conversation. And whether any or all of that is true, I think another major factor is what is Israel's attitude to what we could perhaps best call an operational pause. It looks as if Israel is determined to see the diminution of Iran's influence and strength. It seems determined to carry on its attacks on Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. So I think it'll be interesting to see whether Donald Trump is able to lean on Prime Minister Netanyahu to actually rein the Israelis back. And that's not a given.
There's been quite a lot about actually they've got very different war aims, haven't they? Interestingly, just while we were talking, the Fars agency, news agency in Iran, has said there's been no contact with the US. Again, directly addressing the point you made, what proof do we have there has been this conversation?
Well, I think that's right. I mean, I think Donald Trump is remarkable in a rather negative way, that he can say one thing and then he can say another thing. And frankly, no one really knows where the truth lies. I think the positive is that it looks now as if he's not going to smash up and obliterate Iran's civil infrastructure and energy infrastructure. And that has to be a good thing for Iran, obviously, but I think it's also a good thing for world trade and for the world economy, because I think we were all staring down the barrel at breakfast time this morning. A really serious and ongoing economic crisis. Now, whether that will rematerialize, heaven only knows, but at least we've got a crumb of comfort, I think, now.
Well, indeed, we're often told, aren't we, that politicians will talk about their political aims and diplomatic aims, and war is the extension of diplomacy by other means, and they would seek help from advice from people like you, when you were a former head of the British Army, in terms of the tactics of how military can be used to achieve any of those aims. Are you convinced that you know what the strategic aims of this war are?
Well, I think we thought we knew at the start. I think there were three. One was to reduce, if not remove, Iran's capacity to generate a nuclear weapon. Second, similarly, their ballistic missile capability, much reduce that so it couldn't strike Israel and US bases in the Gulf region. And then thirdly, this clearly stated, but then walked back from, objective to get regime change. Now, I think most people realize that you're not going to get regime change by purely bombing from the sky. A regime change will only come in Iran if the people of Iran want it. And I think there's a contrary effect here, that because the Americans and Israelis have been so tough on Iran, that even people who were questioning their support of the regime are probably toughening their support now, because they frankly don't like being kicked around by the Americans and the Iranians. So I think two of the three objectives can be largely achieved. The third one won't. Whatever else Donald Trump thinks he's doing, you've got to read inside his own mind if you can.
Yeah, although, of course, I think he was rather clear, wasn't he, that, this was an opportunity for the Iranian people to rise up in the face of the IRGC, if they could, but it wasn't going to be something. Regime change wasn't something that the Americans were going to, go into Iran to achieve. You mentioned ballistic missiles and that ballistic missile threat, not just to Israel, but to US bases in Arab states around the Middle East. But of course, we've also seen that a missile attack thankfully failed on Diego Garcia, US and British base in the middle of the Indian Ocean, suggesting, against what appears to have been all the military intelligence so far, that Iran does have weapons which can reach pretty much twice as far range as we thought, which meant they could hit London, Berlin, Paris and elsewhere. How concerned are you about what knowledge we have about what potential threat Iran poses to the West generally, not just even to the Middle East, and what needs to be done about it?
Well, I'm quite sure that our defence intelligence community will be thoroughly examining the possibility that Iran could have a ballistic missile that could reach as far as London. I think from what I've understood, it's theoretically possible that they might be able to extend the range of their existing longer range missiles, but it would probably mean that the payload that it could carry would be very small and not entirely guarantee that it could reach as far as London. But
is it worth the risk? I mean, there's lots of fear that we are defenceless against Iranian missiles, that we don't actually have a proper defence capability if Iran did.
That's what I was going on to say.
Okay.
You go right back to the 97-98 Strategic Defence Review at the start of Tony Blair's government. There was a programme called Ballistic Missile Defence, which it was decided not to continue with, and the cost savings from cancelling that programme, and I was director of the Defence Programme staff at the time, the cost savings from cancelling that programme meant that most of the rest of that defence review was then affordable. Right. And since then, there has been no widespread ballistic missile defence programme carried forward. Nothing like the Iron Dome that the Israelis have.
Yeah.
Now, we've got a certain amount of ballistic missile defence, but it's mostly point defence. The Type 45 destroyers, for example, HMS Dragon, manfully making its way towards Cyprus,
still
has got that kind of capability. But it's point defence, not blanket defence. And if we thought there was a credible, serious threat to this country from extended ballistic missiles, well, there'll be a lot of head scratching going on in Whitehall and the Ministry of Defence at the present moment to work out what to do about it. It would be a real challenge.
Well, indeed, again, and if we weren't aware of that ballistic missile capability of Iran, what else are we not aware of them, and indeed any other regime? And that's the concern, isn't it? How concerned are you about that missile attack, an attempt on Diego Garcia? One missile shot down, one missile failed. But the fact that we didn't know about it for apparently 30 hours, and actually the information came out through the US media rather than an announcement from the Ministry of Defence here, would we normally expect to be told that sort of thing publicly, immediately, within days? Has there been a cover-up, and does that concern you?
Well, I can't think why there would be any good reason not to make that information available. It's a British base, there are British service people there, and if they have come under some form of attack. And of course, we've only got probably unverified reports that one failed in flight and one failed to hit its target.
Yeah.
Of course, we don't know. We know that a US warship took it down. Now, we don't know where in the Indian Ocean it did take it down. Was it very close to Diego Garcia, or was it some distance away?
Yeah.
I think that's quite relevant in terms of determining the overall range of these missiles. I'm quite surprised if that attack did materialize, that it wasn't made public by both the British government and the US government at the same time and rather earlier. It does smack of some form of cover-up, and that is not helpful. I think British people have a right to be kept informed, and the government needs to be transparent.
We're in the fourth week of this conflict right now, and again, the impact is being felt not just in Iran or in Israel or US bases in the Middle East. It's across Arab states and now much wider, and the economic impact, of course, affecting everyone around the world. And we'll certainly hope that that can be stemmed by what was announced this morning. If you were currently the head of the British Army, what advice would you be giving Keir Starmer about, well, from the word go, about what Britain should be doing, what he should be doing?
Well, I think right from the word go, I would have been prepared to advise the Prime Minister, or advise the Chief of the Defence Staff to advise the Prime Minister that if the Americans requested the use of their bases, which we provide for them, that they should be allowed to do so. It seems rather odd that the base at Fairford and the two in East Anglia and the one at Diego Garcia, which we provide to the Americans, that at the moment that they want to use them, we say that they can't.
Yeah.
Okay, he then subsequently changed his mind. Now, the other argument has been made, well, they didn't consult us, but they didn't bother to try and build a coalition of the willing, so we were taken by surprise, and the default was to say no. I think we should have been more agile. I think we should have thought about the long-term consequences of saying no, because We need allies, the Americans need allies, and we've always been a very trusted ally of the Americans. And let's face it, Keir Starmer has made much over the last 18 months of his ability to get on with Donald Trump. So to destroy that by a quick decision, which was inevitably going to annoy Donald Trump, I think was quite short-sighted and lost the view of the bigger picture.
I realise as a military man you don't normally do politics, but can I ask you, are you concerned, as many have expressed, that British military and tactical and diplomatic decisions are now often being made based on concerns about particular communities and how they vote in this country? Whether we've seen the last general election, we saw those 5 MPs for Gaza, we saw the Gorton and Denton by-election and votes going with the Muslim community there, in Manchester, going to the Green Party on the issue of Gaza and international politics. Are you concerned at all that Britain's foreign policy, and therefore by definition its sort of defence policy, is being changed by just the influence of particular communities in Britain?
Well, I am concerned. If this is true, it is deeply upsetting or deeply concerning. I think what our leaders should do is work out what is in the national interest and take policy decisions based on the national interest and not their own narrow electoral calculations about saying this or saying that, doing this or doing that. Well, actually, what effect that will have on their chances of winning an election or staying in government. So I think what statesmen need to do is work out what is in the national interest and take decisions and base policy on the national interest and try and take a medium to long-term view rather than just short-term politically electoral decision making.
Are you saying that Keir Starmer is not a statesman?
Well, I think it's not really for me to say. Donald Trump has said he's not a Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill was certainly a statesman, but then equally Donald Trump was not a President Roosevelt. He was a statesman.
This is true.
I think labelling people is probably a little bit cheap, and I think I won't indulge that much.
Are you concerned, though, because this is a concern for all of our audience watching and listening right now and people around the country, are you concerned that this impact of international, various different communities, but in particular communities coming from a view, a very anti-Israel view, that is actually damaging our national interest and that it is putting us more at risk?
Well, I think everything that happens in the world these days tends to be interlinked. There is a school of thought which is quite possibly correct, that the 4 Jewish ambulances that were set fire overnight was a result of some Iranian intervention, or at least an Iranian sympathizer that took action, or group that took action like that. So I think we have to accept that many events across the world are interlinked, interrelated, and the linkages are probably there.
Okay, really good to talk to you. Always great to get your thoughts and your expertise. Lord Dannatt, former head of the British Army there, Richard Dannatt. Thank you for that. Benedict Spence, interesting there. That chuckle on that pause was a bit of a giveaway about the statement question to him about Keir Starmer. But interesting talking about, the concern about, British politicians need to act in our national interest.
Yeah.
I remember doing this at A-level, history A-level, and it was just about, British interest, who's our ally in Europe? No, we've always gone for the balance of power in Europe. We kind of support whoever is sort of, under attack. We've had interest around the world. We were a great empire once, and we have, whether people like it or not, we can't be isolationists. We have fingers in pies everywhere around the world.
We do, and I think that acting in British interests is something that has been lost sight of by a collective of people, and it's not fair to just put the blame on Keir Starmer because he is simply a product of this school of thought, which
He's
is
the Prime Minister.
No. In the post-imperial age, that Britain has to still continue to act as though it is representing and acting for people around the world. It can't do that, though. It can't, if it doesn't, look after itself first. That's the only reason Britain became an empire, because it was strong and powerful at home. Until you get those basics, fundamentals right, you can't be everything.
Had reliable and cheap and affordable energy sources?
Energy, industry, a strong military, rule of law,
those all come back to...
They all come downstream of coal, basically. But that's the thing. thing. Until you have those basic building blocks there and a rigid system, a robust system, actually you can't be everything to everybody. The United States can do it up to a point because it has those things. China increasingly is flexing its muscles because it has those things. We don't. And until we get to that point, there's no point.
I just think we're all very relieved that Ed Miliband, the Energy Secretary, is going to be at this meeting, this Cobra meeting today about our future. I mean, genuinely, he's the problem, not the solution. That's the biggest issue.
It's incredibly depressing that a man who was soundly rejected by the British, and go back to what I was saying about us not really living in a democracy, the British public had the option of Ed Miliband.
And they
said no, and yet he's been foisted back on us, and he is in charge of the very building block that is most important.
But this is the key thing. You think, he's only Energy Secretary. No. He's Chancellor, Foreign Secretary, Defence Secretary. He's Housing Secretary. He's everything. He's everything, guys, because energy policy decides all of those things. It is as simple as that. And at the end of the day, we are paying an absolute fortune to get our oil and the gas from the North Sea, but we're paying Norway for it, and the Norwegian government is taking all those tax receipts and getting all that money and getting all those jobs, and we're not, because we've got this brilliant policy. We're going to import all the fossil fuels that we still need and will need for many decades, rather than getting out of the ground near us. It genuinely, mind-bogglingly insane. Some of us have been saying it before it was fashionable, but there we are, 12:23.